You unlock this door with the key of compassion. Beyond it is another world, a world of science, a world of common sense, a world of sanity. You're moving into a land of both empathy and ethics, of nutritional knowledge and empowerment. You've just crossed over into Dr. Osborne's zone. We got a great show for you tonight. We're going to be talking about all things protein. That's right, a crash course on protein. It's one of the most overlooked macronutrients today. Carbs and fat get all the notoriety, get all the claim to fame, and protein kind of sits on the sideline and doesn't get much notoriety. So we're going to shine a big headlight on protein tonight, why it's important, how certain medications can deplete it, how certain situations can require that you need more in order to heal and repair and overcome, especially if you're struggling with chronic inflammatory illnesses. So stick with me tonight. We're going to go through the entire topic. So, protein deficiency, why is it important? Let's first talk about why protein is important. So, just some basic biochemistry here, and we won't get too deep into it, but what is protein? So, protein are these structures that the body produces as a result of combining amino acids. So amino acids, think of these as building blocks to protein. And there are about 20 different amino acids. 10 of them are essential amino acids, and meaning that we have to eat these 10 essential amino acids in our diet, and if we have these 10 in adequate quantities, our body can make the other 10 amino acids through biochemistry. Protein forms, or amino acids form helixes, and then these helixes go on to form greater polypeptide chains or structures, and then these structures go on to form what's called a protein. So there's kind of an ascension of what happens from the building block of the amino acid all the way through to the production of a protein. Now, there are thousands and thousands of different proteins that the body produces. I'm going to give you a few examples of some proteins that you might not even realize. One of them is a protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein inside your red blood cells, and it carries oxygen. So it's a very important protein, and this is actually a loss or a lack of proper hemoglobin leads to anemia, which can cause a reduction in oxygen delivery to your tissues, which makes you tired and brain foggy and slow to heal. So this is, again, hemoglobin is a protein, right, basically derived from amino acids and other nutrients to carry oxygen. So that's just one common example. Many of you have probably heard of some of these other connections, that protein forms your muscles and tendons. So if you don't get adequate protein, this is why this is so critical and important, then if you try to work out or exercise, oftentimes what we'll see happen is you will actually injure yourself and end up basically not exercising, right? So it's kind of think of it as a cycle, really. If you exercise, especially those of you that are older, and we'll get more into this in just a minute, but if you're trying to exercise and you're trying to do weight resistance or weight-bearing activity and you're not getting adequate protein, you'll actually injure yourself. In essence, the lack of protein, because it's required for healing and repair of that exercise, will lead to an injury that can knock you out of the ability to exercise altogether. This is where we actually see a lot of people as they get older. They think, hey, I'm just getting older, and so it's not really a lack of protein per se, it's just my age, and nothing could be further from the truth. Now, one of the myths about protein, we hear this a lot, is that too much protein causes kidney damage. This is a very big myth. There's no direct evidence that shows this to be the case. Now, that being said, there are some people, when they reduce their protein, we'll see improvements in kidney function, but that's not the rule. That's really more the exception. And so if you're worried, if your doctor's told you eating too much protein causes kidney damage, he's generalizing and probably to your own detriment, because what happens to a lot of people is they reduce their protein. We saw this really specifically in the 80s and 90s. They increase their carbs to make up for the calories. And so what does that do? This combination of lowered protein, because lowered protein also comes with reduced fat, because a lot of your fat comes with protein, especially if you're eating animal foods. But carbohydrates, this increases blood sugar, right? And it increases the risk of, aside from that, it increases the risk of inflammation, depending on the type of carb that you're eating. Now, some would argue that not all carbs are created equally, and I agree with that. But when most people switch to this type of low protein, high carbohydrate diet, regardless of the quality of carbohydrate, if your protein needs aren't being met, your muscles, your tendons won't repair, and they'll actually, your body will start to auto-catabolize. So it will start to catabolize, that means break down. If we put an auto in front of that, it means your body, you self-breaking down, you're auto-catabolizing your muscle to get to protein. You're getting that protein out of your muscle. Remember, what is your muscle? Muscle and bone both. So really, it's between these two. Muscle and bone are storage. And obviously, muscle has a purpose to move you and to help you function, but they're also storage sites for extra protein. And this is why muscle will grow and bone can become more dense. If you have adequate protein and you're exercising, you can pack more density into these tissues. And then if you have extra, right, if something happens like illness, like a cold or a massive flu where you're running high fevers and you're in bed for a week, you know, your body has protein, extra protein stored in these muscles. Because why is that important? Because this protein, we ran out of room here, this protein is important for immune function. So how does your immune system function if it doesn't have adequate protein? Your antibodies are made from protein. Your body's ability to make weapons against bad guys, right? But not only that, there's also albumin, which is an important protein constituent in the bloodstream. So antibodies, albumin, protein's important for your immune system to be able to do its job. If you're already getting a low protein, high carbohydrate diet, you're exercise intolerant, your immune system's going to follow that, and then you're going to be a mess. So it's very, very important to understand that muscle requires protein for repair, but also muscle is a reserve tank for protein. Your bone requires protein. I'm sure you've all heard of collagen. So the bone is a collagen matrix. Most of your bone is not calcium. This is another kind of nutritional myth. People think, oh, if I just take more calcium, my bone density will increase. And that's not true. Collagen is protein, and it is the backbone or the matrix, if you will, of your bone. And so you have this matrix where minerals deposit into this protein matrix called collagen. And so most of your bone is actually protein, not mineral. Mineralization occurs to the collagen to make it flexible and strong, because your bone needs to be flexible and strong. But collagen is the vast majority of your bony tissue. We also have the importance of protein in our organs. Our organs require protein. Now, some of our organs require protein for structure, so just their shape and structure. But we also have to understand that our organs produce hormones. And hormones and neurochemicals. And these structures, if you will, are proteins. You can't make testosterone and estrogen or progesterone without protein. You can't make serotonin and dopamine and adrenaline without protein. So protein is required to produce your hormones and your neurochemicals. Protein's also required for the structure of your organs. Protein's also required to produce digestive enzymes. So when your gut produces those enzymes, right, to help you break your food down. These are proteins in essence, and so not getting adequate protein is going to affect your digestion. It's a catch-22 because many people, they reduce their caloric intake in an effort to try to lose weight, and in fact, if they reduce their protein intake to an inadequate level, they won't be able to digest the nutrition from the carbs that they're eating, and they'll become even more accelerated in their malnourishment. So protein, very, very important. We also know that skin, the same here. So collagen, also important for skin. So if I haven't convinced you enough yet already that protein's super important, let me lean in on vanity for just a minute. Your skin's ability to have elasticity, to let wrinkle less, is largely dependent upon the collagen matrix within the skin, within the subdermal layers of the skin. And so lack of protein and lack of a particular type of protein called collagen will make you age faster, will make you look older, will make your skin wrinkle prematurely. Nobody wants that. So make sure you're getting your adequate protein. So these are some of the primary functions of protein. Again, there's a lot of functions here. Your muscle tissue, your immune function, your bone structure, your organs and what they produce in terms of chemicals, and then your skin in terms of structure and beauty. So protein, can't live without it. Don't make the attempt. Now, I want to talk for just a minute here about what happens with that heavy carbohydrate diet. So if you are on one of these heavy carb diets and you're not getting adequate protein, and especially you look at this diagram here, so these things up here that we're drawing or that we're making allusion to, these are common compounds found in grain. That's why you see here, this is the grain inflammation, grain-induced inflammation cycle. So I'm going to talk in just a minute about protein digestion, so stick with me, but I want to get to this. So these are the things that are commonly found in our modern grains, right? We have gluten, so if you're gluten sensitive, that's a major issue. We have GMOs, the glyphosate, and the GMO modification of grains. We have pesticides, aside from glyphosate, like atrazine. We have ATIs. These are proteins, amylase trypsin inhibitors. These are proteins that can suppress digestion and cause inflammation in the GI tract. We have heavy metals. I don't know if you guys saw this, but here just a week ago, major carrier of rice-based baby formulas pulled their product in a massive recall because of heavy metal poisoning or heavy metal contamination. We have omega-6, excessive quantities of omega-6 which contribute to inflammation. Grains oftentimes are contaminated with mold and mycotoxins. We have the fact that we know they can cause, especially this gluten here, can cause intestinal permeability and leaky gut. And then we have also, we know that grains is a staple in the American diet. 50%, more than 50% of calories is, for most people, is from wheat. And that doesn't count the other grains, it's just wheat, right? So we count oats and we count corn or we count rice, that number goes up. That's excessive carbohydrate, right? And so what happens? When you plug all of this into your mouth, this funnel represents your mouth, okay? It's coming down, it comes up, and one of the byproducts is inflammation. And we know that whether you're gluten sensitive or you're reacting to the metal, or the omega-6 excessively is inflammatory to you, or the pesticides are creating inflammation, we know it creates inflammation. Now, if it's from a carbohydrate perspective, carbohydrates increase insulin. And excessive insulin increases obesity. It increases central adiposity, which is fat around your waist, fat around your visceral abdominal tissue, which is around your heart, around your intestines, etc. It's the most dangerous kind of weight gain to have, and we know that that increased type of fat increases cortisol. So follow me here. So we have this increased inflammation in step one, and from there we keep going, and we get inflammation leads to your body's normal response, which is to make cortisol. Now cortisol does what? It's like a fire truck. So it puts out, or tries to put out, the fire. That's why your body's producing the inflammation. Your body is trying to put out the fire from the food that you just ate. Now, we know that cortisol is catabolic, and so what happens is cortisol leads to muscle loss. It's a natural byproduct of cortisol's reactivity. So any of you ever had a steroid? Raise your hand in the room. Just, say yes if you've ever taken cortisol or a corticosteroid, or had a doctor give you an oral steroid or inject you with a steroid, and you got chubbier or you gained a bunch of weight when you were on that. It's because cortisol causes muscle loss and weight gain. Okay, so it causes muscle loss catabolically, breaking your muscle down. It causes weight gain because the byproduct of losing your muscle is losing your metabolism, so your weight will naturally go up. But beyond that, cortisol doesn't just cause muscle loss. Cortisol also increases insulin response, which, again, coming back over here, increased insulin, increased weight gain, and increased cortisol. It's a vicious cycle between cortisol and insulin. It just keeps spinning. And then that weight gain leads to, for most people, it leads to a joint compression, it leads to joint pain, because you're putting more weight on your joints. Just think about it for a minute. If you weigh an extra 10 pounds, right, more than what you should, and you're walking, that pressure's on your knees, that pressure's on your spine, it's in the base of your neck. So that most people aren't 10 pounds overweight, though. They're 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, especially chronic adults in the United States. We're at a 60% obesity rate in the US today. That's more than 10 pounds of a little extra weight. We're talking about extra half people that we're carrying around. Imagine piggybacking somebody who weighed 50 or 60 pounds all day long, every day. That's what happens here. And then your joints start to collapse. They start to break down. They start to get increased wear and tear on them, right? And then what? That's inflammation, right? So your joints become inflamed. And that's what we oftentimes refer to as arthritis. This is why when people start having pain, they go to their doctor, right? And what happens is they get prescription pain medications, and then those pain medications will do what? They'll block the inflammation, but they won't block the cortisol response. They will tamper down the inflammation, so they'll put the pain on the back burner to a certain extent. They'll mask the symptom, but it will not change the hormone profile. It won't change this hormone profile or this hormone profile. Now, beyond that, we know, depending on the kind of pain medication, so let's say your doctor gave you an NSAID, that stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and so NSAIDs, that would be your ibuprofen or your aspirin or your Celebrex. These are non-steroid-based drugs that suppress inflammation. And so NSAIDs cause vitamin C, iron, and folate deficiency. Okay, so NSAIDs reduce. This is over time. This is not overnight. So if you took ibuprofen, one time this month, that's not what's happening here. It's the constant use, the consistent use. So you get vitamin C, iron, or folate deficiency. These three nutrients, what are they important for? Joint and cartilage formation. So it's hard to produce cartilage, it's hard to repair a joint when your vitamin C levels are low. It doesn't happen. And this is why these NSAIDs are a bad idea nutritionally, because they don't fix why the inflammation's there, and they create nutritional parameters that lead to increased risk for the development of more arthritis. Now, that's not all. NSAIDs also cause leaky gut. They cause, even a baby aspirin. So many of you are taking aspirin. I had this conversation with a patient earlier today. Doctor wanted them to take a baby aspirin and said there was no side effects. And what you should know is a baby aspirin is 10 times the dose required to cause gastric bleeding and ulceration. That's a baby aspirin. 10 times the dose of what it takes to cause bleeding or ulceration of the stomach. It only takes 7.5 milligrams of aspirin to do that. So we know they cause leaky gut, and they cause what's known as occult blood loss, which is loss of blood through the stool due to the damage. They strip away the mucosal lining. So that's just the NSAID, right? We're just getting warmed up here. What if you didn't get put on an NSAID? What if your doctor instead decided to go for the big gun, and they prescribed corticosteroid. Corticosteroids are the big guns. And I've seen this a lot with people that come to see me. They're on low doses of corticosteroids, like 5 milligrams or 2.5 milligrams. But even at those lower doses, corticosteroids cause bone loss, and they also cause muscle loss. Just what we were just talking about. Your own cortisol can create muscle loss, but external corticosteroids coming in can also do it. So bone loss, muscle loss, they also increase your blood pressure. They also deplete your body of magnesium and calcium and vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc, to name a few of the nutrients. So you think about that for a minute. You're trading your inflammation, right, which was caused by what you're eating. You're trading it in for a medicine that blocks that inflammation but causes the very same problems that we're trying to avoid. Because remember, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what kind of drug or medicine that you take, ultimately the end goal is to have you out of pain, but not just to have you out of pain. It's so that you can function. It's so that you can be healthy and happy and function. So if the drug solution is not going to lead to that outcome, then what you're really just doing is buying a little bit of time while you're creating chronic disease as a result of drug-induced side effects. So corticosteroids, another common drug used for pain. Another common one, and this one's over the counter, and that's Tylenol, right? And so you may just pop Tylenol or acetaminophen. And so this has been shown to reduce or to cause glutathione depletion. It also damages the liver. Glutathione helps your liver heal and repair and detoxify. So if you're taking chronic acetaminophen or Tylenol, you're basically, you're reducing your liver's capacity for detoxification. And so now every toxin that you're being exposed to, you're hindering your liver's ability to get rid of those toxins, and then you get excessive toxin accumulation within your body. And of course, that's going to lead to inflammation in other ways, right? So you don't necessarily want to trade that off. And then lastly, not lastly, but one of the last ones that we'll talk about tonight, we could talk about this all night, would be your class of medicines that are even more potent. So like your opiates. So this would be things like OxyContin, Dilaudid, drugs that are highly, highly addictive, right? And these drugs affect the gut. So they really slow it down. They reduce the gut motility. They can cause severe constipation. But beyond that, they alter neurological perception of pain. And that doesn't come free. Like when you take these types of medications, I think was it last year or the year before, we had, I want to say in the neighborhood of 15,000 deaths from the proper use, not from abuse, not from addicts, but just from the proper drug prescription, 15,000 deaths. As a matter of fact, Thomas Frieden, the ex-director of the CDC, said, we know of no other drug that causes death so regularly for the treatment of something that doesn't necessarily kill you, which is pain. So where this class of medicine should be used is in like somebody whose quality of life, maybe they're struggling with cancer and they're on hospice care, and we're just trying to ease their pain. Like that's true pain control, that's true compassion. But I have had patients that come to me and their doctors are writing opiates for headaches. Their doctors are writing opiates for arthritis, which is absolutely, in my opinion, it's crazy. And it sets the stage for complete failure. So we've got those medications that are major ways that doctors will prescribe in order to block that inflammation that was being caused by what was being ingested. And so this is the grain inflammation cycle, but we could put other things in here as well, couldn't we? We could add to this list, we could add trans fat, we could add sugar, we could add food additives, okay, we could add other environmental chemicals. All of these things have to run through your body and can have the potential to create an inflammatory situation that can lead to prescription drug use to try to block the body's natural alarm system. Remember why this pain is happening. It's not happening so that you can mask it. It's happening because your body is trying to warn you to quit doing this and to quit doing this. So listen to the warning, don't ignore it. Now, I want to talk about something else here as well. I'm going to make a little bit of room on the board. And that, going back to protein, as we said that when you're chronically inflamed, actually let me keep this here, let me just move it over this way. When you're chronically inflamed, okay, when you're chronically inflamed, one of the things that happens is your body sequesters, or basically steals, protein from your muscle to fight inflammation and to fight the immune battles. When you're chronically inflamed, chronic inflammation is a major stress on your immune system. Remember, this is immune stress. And this is a problem because when you start breaking down your muscle, okay, to fight the inflammation, you compromise your immune system's ability to get access to that protein, and you increase the risk for the development of infectious problems. So, you know, whether it's a cold or whether it's a flu, but you also increase the risk, and not just for infectious, but, you know, for chronic types of infections like yeast overgrowth or candida overgrowth. So you kind of make room for that type of problem. And then yeast, if you're gluten sensitive, yeast overgrowth mimics gluten sensitivity, and we don't have time to get into the depth of that tonight, but this combination can make you even sicker, but it can also make you infectiously sick, because as your body is stressed out over the chronic inflammation, it's going to break down your muscle. That forwards this cycle all over again. Now, there are different requirements. So back to protein. So if we're trying to say, okay, if protein is critical for this, right, and obviously diet change, meaning we've got to change our diet to be less high carb. So we have to have balance of macros, of macronutrients. This is very important. A lot of people promote, I'll just say, chronic imbalance on both sides of the equation. You see people promoting high carb diets, you see people promoting high fat diets, and you see people promoting high meat diets. And I think there's reasons why different people promote those, because some people are helped by each of those different types of diets. But remember, generally speaking, when you create an imbalanced diet to correct an imbalanced diet, you end up, if you stay in that imbalanced diet long enough, you create new imbalance and create new symptoms down the road. So remember, it's important to get back to balance. So protein, 33%, carbs, 33%, and fat, 33%. Now, that's 99%, so add the 0.3 infinity after that if you'd like to correct the math here. But I'm not telling you to get out a calculator and weigh and count every bit that you eat and get it exactly right, but you're shooting for equality. And so some days you might have 40% here, you might have 30% here, you might have 30 here. Other days you might have 40 here, 30 here, 30 here, etc. There can be shift and variance within that, as long but what you're trying to strive for is a version of equality amongst those macronutrients. Your body needs all three. And again, where people struggle today is they have way too many. They're more like 60-70% here, right? And then what does that leave? That leaves minimal quantities of nourishing protein and minimal quantities of nourishing fat. Most of the people in these high carb diets, the type of fat they're getting is trans fat. The type of protein they're getting is from the grain directly itself, which is very low quality protein. It's not good quality, high biological value protein. And so they become protein malnourished. Now, if we want to talk about protein malnourishment, you know, some of the first things that we see happen in people with protein malnourishment. So not enough protein. One of the biggest symptoms, we'll just put symptoms. Symptoms of not enough protein. Number one, hair loss. Ladies, if you're losing your hair and you don't know why, check your protein. Number 2, we'll see skin bruising happen very easily. So you might brush the wall and you're like, why am I so bruised? Bruising can happen really common or really aggressively with inadequate protein intake. We'll see anxiety develop, and that's because the protein, much of the protein is necessary for the production of the hormones that regulate anxiety. We'll also see depression develop in protein malnourished. We'll see like intolerance to exercise. So if you go to the gym, you try to work out, and you're paying a price for days after or weeks after, not just typical muscle soreness, but you're out for the count, that intolerance to exercise may be because you're not getting adequate protein. What else do we see? We see frequent infections. So if you pick up every cold, every flu, every little thing that gets passed around, you know, you got to think the potential possibility that you might be low in protein. These are some of the big ones. There certainly are a lot more. I mean, we can link bone loss. We can link it to blood sugar dysregulation or diabetes or metabolic syndrome. Okay, so there are a lot of symptoms associated, but these are some of the most early ones, and that's why I want you to know what to look for early on. Okay, look for these types of things. The top 6 here, look for those things, because those are really early, typically really early symptoms of protein malnourishment. Actually, let's just add one more. Let's add 6.5, or we'll call it number 9, but let's add focus, attention problems. So inability to focus. Again, much of your neurotransmission is protein oriented. Okay, so these are your top symptoms. Now, if you're now some people will say, well, protein deficiency doesn't exist in the U.S. There's a condition called kwashiorkor, which is major protein malnutrition that does occur in third world countries where the diets are largely grain-based diets. And so these individuals will develop a host of different problems much more aggressively. But before they develop those aggressive problems, they develop these ones. It's thought that 1 billion people on the planet today are protein malnourished. Many of them are here in the U.S. and other industrialized countries. So don't let your doctor try to dismiss protein from the equation. Let's talk a little bit next about requirements of protein. I think this is an important topic. And let's just pull this one up and make it a little bit bigger. I want to just share with you some research. So this was a major review published in the Journal of Applied Physiology and Nutrition and Metabolism on the protein requirements, keyword here, beyond the RDA, the recommended daily allowance. And this is a review on the implications for optimizing health. So remember, the RDA is typically for not dying. So it's the recommendation so that you don't die immediately, right? So it's so you're not so malnourished that you would die from that malnourishment quickly. But that's what the RDA's recommendations are based on. The RDA's recommendations are not based on optimization of health. Now, raise your hand. How many of you want optimal health versus how many of you want to just scrape by and just get by and just barely make it? Right? I think that's kind of a no-brainer question. Any of you who answered to the latter part, you guys can go away. But here's in this abstract that I'm going to read to you here. You can see here, growing body of research indicates that protein intakes well above the current RDA help to promote healthy aging. Keyword, healthy aging. Okay, we want healthy aging. Appetite regulation, meaning helps with cravings, right? Weight management, and goals aligned with athletic performance. Now, I know many of you don't consider yourself to be athletes, but every single one of you should think of yourself as an athlete, even if it's an amateur athlete, because your body, right, you should be able to move it. You should be able to do things with your body and your body weight that are athletic in nature. And to maintain that function is actually one of the symptoms of premature loss of quality of life and premature death. So we want to be able to maintain our function through our athletic performance and prowess. So higher protein intakes may help prevent age-related sarcopenia. That's what sarcopenia means, age-related muscle loss. Now, I will say this, that term, it sounds fancy, but really, in my opinion, sarcopenia exists only because scientists gave it a definition. Why do we see people develop sarcopenia? It has nothing to do with age. Now, the meaning of sarcopenia is age-related muscle loss. But muscle loss doesn't occur as a function of aging. Muscle loss occurs as a function of damaging your body over time and then blaming the aging process for your lack of choices or for your wrong choices. Now, there is some loss that does occur with aging. Obviously, an 80-year-old man is not going to be as strong as a 30-year-old man in his prime. So there is some age relation to it. But for the vast majority of you listening to this, don't blame your age, blame your behavior first. Once you have all of your behavior dialed in, then we can start talking about true age-related muscle loss. So again, higher protein intakes help prevent age-related muscle loss, indicating that it isn't age, that it's diet. Again, point being made, the loss of muscle mass and strength that predisposes older adults to frailty. Despite persistent beliefs to the contrary, we can find no evidence-based link between high-protein diets and renal or kidney disease or adverse bone health. Okay, there's a lot going on. We're going to get into that in just a minute. So current evidence indicates intakes in the range of 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day of high-quality protein is a more ideal target for achieving optimal health outcomes in adults. Now, this is almost twice. So understand, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. The RDA is 0.8. That's double. That's almost twice as much as the recommended daily allowance makes for protein intake. So this is what science is folding out. This is what we're seeing play out in the evidence and research, is we're seeing that 0.8 is vastly too low. 1.6, as high as 1.6, which is twice the RDA, might be better, especially if you're older. And 1.2, which 1.2 is not quite as high, but still, it's still much higher than 0.8, and so that equates to a lot more protein in the course of the day. Now, let's shrink this down because I want to talk about some of this other research too. So this research study, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, elderly women accommodated to a low-protein diet with losses of body cell mass, loss of muscle function, and immune response. This is what I was talking about earlier. When you don't get adequate protein, your immune system starts to fail you. I mean, think about it. Look at if we're talking about COVID and the reality of COVID affecting people in this country, who did it affect the worst? It affected people who were overweight, who probably had high carbohydrate diets, just based on the fact that the vast majority of them had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they had high blood sugar or diabetes. And so that's one of the reasons it affected them. Their diets were reversed. They were high carbohydrate, they were on low protein type diets. Low protein is the way we weaken animals' immune systems in research studies, just so you know. And so again, this study, subjects experienced significant losses in lean tissue when their protein was diminished, immune response, and muscle function. The adequate protein group was in nitrogen balance, meaning they had enough protein throughout the study without changes in lean tissue and with improvements in immune response, serum immunoglobulins. These are again, antibodies. That's what an immunoglobulin is. And then albumin, total protein values, and muscle function. Thus, elderly women fed low protein diet accommodated to the diet by compromising functional capacity, their ability to function, whereas those fed the adequate diet maintained functional capacity. Keyword, functional capacity. How many of you want to lose your ability to function as you get older, or how many of you want to, in your golden years, as you move on, you want to maintain as much function as possible, right? Protein is very, very important for the maintenance of that. Okay, let's move into this next one. Protein requirements and recommendations for older people. This is a major review that was published in the journal Nutrients. So you can see here, randomized controlled trials report a clear benefit of increased dietary protein on lean mass gain and leg strength, particularly when combined with resistance exercise. There's good consistent evidence, levels 3 to 4. Level 4 evidence is the highest level of scientific evidence that we have. So again, what they're saying is there's the highest level of scientific evidence available for this to make this statement, that consumption of 1 to 1.3 grams per kilogram of day of dietary protein combined with twice weekly progressive resistant exercise reduces age-related muscle mass loss. Older people appear to require 1 to 1.3 grams per kilogram of day of dietary protein to optimize their physical function, particularly whilst undertaking resistance exercise recommendations. So, what did I say earlier? I said that many of you might have or develop exercise intolerance, and part of that exercise intolerance is that your diet is inadequate in terms of total protein. So you're not getting what your body needs to heal and repair from the exercise that you're doing. So you start your exercise and you injure out. And when you injure out of your exercise, you're not exercising. And when you injure out, what happens next is you gain weight. You've lost function, you lose strength, and you find yourself frail. You know, I see this all the time, you know, in the 60 plus. They can't get off the floor. They not only down on the floor and maybe play with them, they can't get down on the floor because they're scared they can't get back up because they've lost so much of their strength and they're so frail that their legs don't have the strength. So they can either go from a chair to standing, but to get down on the floor and get back up becomes a very difficult task. To walk stairs becomes a very difficult task. This is what I mean by loss of function. You got to get enough protein. Now, we've said there's some formulas for quantity of protein, and so, you know, the RDA is 0.8 grams per, or I should say grams of protein per kilogram of weight. So a kilogram, so take your weight in pounds, if you want to figure out what you weigh in kilograms, so take your weight in pounds and divide it by 2.2, and that equals kilograms. And so then you take that number, that kilogram number, whatever you are. So for example, if you're 100 pounds, you divide that by 2.2, somebody do the math, it's like 44 or somewhere in that neighborhood kilograms. Then you would multiply that number by 0.8, and that's what the government says you should get in terms of total protein. But what I'm showing you tonight is what the research says, which is you should be multiplying that number by 1.2 to 1.4 grams, especially if you're in that 50 plus age bracket. If you want to maintain your lean mass and maintain your muscle, you've got to be getting more protein. You got to be getting adequate quantities of protein. For the average person, you know, that weighs 150 pounds. So if you weigh 150 pounds, you know, that's approximately 80 to 90 grams of protein per day. Now, most people, when I get them in my practice, they're somewhere around 40 to 50. So they're somewhere around half that. And they're sick all the time. Their muscles are wasting. They can't exercise. They're fatigued. They've got brain fog. They've got tendencies toward focus and concentration problems and anxiety and memory issues. And a big part of it is protein. And I know we've talked a lot in the past about vitamins and minerals and how important they are, but protein is so critical, and you've got to get enough. And some of you may be asking, you know, kind of the next question, which is, you know, what are the best food sources of protein? And so some of you are following a vegetarian diet, and some of you are following the opposite of a vegetarian diet. You know, if you're a vegetarian, where do you get most of your protein from? You get most of your protein from legumes. Now, if you can also get protein from grains, although again, the quality of protein from grains is not super high. Legumes and grains are the predominant source, though, of protein in a vegetarian-based diet. Now, and when I say vegetarian, I mean more vegan, because if you're lacto or ovo-vegetarian, there's high-quality protein in dairy, there's high-quality protein in eggs, there's high-quality protein in fish. So depending on what kind of a vegetarian that you are, if you're vegan, you got legumes and grains. But if you're vegetarian and you eat fish, then, you know, my advice is get the fish in you. Dairy's an iffy one if you're gluten sensitive, and you can go back and watch some of my videos on dairy, where we talk about the mimicry between dairy and gluten. It's very important to understand that if you're gluten sensitive. And so fish and dairy and egg, if you're not allergic to egg is a common allergy. But these are, you know, depending on what kind of a vegetarian diet you follow, those three are the best sources of protein pound for pound. And then legumes, grains, and then nuts. So, like, you know, a lot of people think of peanut here, but peanut is a legume. So it's technically, it's not a nut. Nuts would be more your almonds, your pecans, your walnuts, your pistachios. So those, you know, your common nuts, Brazil nuts, etc. So these are going to be sources of protein as well. And then there's plenty of green veggies that also have protein. So like broccoli, and broccoli's a big one. Cauliflower's another one. Your cruciferous cabbage has some protein in it. And some of your other vegetables have protein as well. Some people will go to tofu, especially in the vegetarian community. They'll use tofu, which is fermented soy. Again, the problem with a lot of soy today is it's genetically modified. So if you're going to do this, if you're vegan, you just want to make sure you're buying non-GMO organic soy tofu as opposed to the opposite. So, but if you're trying to get adequate protein and you're not a vegetarian, so again, these are vegetarian options, it's meat, right? So whether you're eating beef, chicken, fish, pork, wild game, fowl, you know, ducks, goose, you know, other types of game birds as well, elk. You know, you've got all kinds of options in the meat family, and then you've got, you know, as well, you've got organ meats, and this is a part a lot of people leave out, but organ meats are very nutrient dense and good sources of protein as well. So there's a lot of room here. If you don't follow a vegetarian diet, there's a ton of room here to get adequate protein, to hit that level, that 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight or more. And actually, some research now, if you're an athletic person, so if you're doing heavy workouts, you know, there's now evidence that shows that 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is actually more effective at keeping you functional and recovering better, just FYI. But most of you probably not competing in major athletic competitions, so that 1.2 to 1.4 is a pretty good range to shoot for. And again, you've got all these different options. Plus, you've got these options over here. I would say those of you listening to me should know better with the grain and the grain inflammation cycle that I showed you earlier. But so those are your options more on a vegetarian side. These are your options on a meat side as well as these options. So you just got a lot more to pick from. Now, there's different qualities of protein as well, and there's different ways to quantify or qualify protein. And the best way to get your protein, though, honestly, is real food. Now, some of you have a hard time with that. Eat real food to get your protein. That's number one. Okay, the number one thing you can do is just eat real food. But some of you want to supplement, and that's understandable, because if you you might have an aversion to texture, you might have a psychological food issue, and so supplementation can be beneficial or helpful. Or maybe you're on a vegetarian diet and it's just really hard to get enough food in to hit those levels of protein that you're trying to achieve, and so this is where a supplement might come in handy. Now, my favorite kind of protein supplement for if you're not vegan is beef protein. We have something called ultra pure protein, which is the highest nitrogen value protein known to man to date. It's very, very effective, and it's very, very clean. So it's from grass-fed cattle. It's grown on organic grasses, etc. So very high quality. And for vegetarians, one of the better kinds is pea, organic pea specifically. Peas are a legume that are rich in protein. So pea protein. Some people opt for hemp protein, which is another decent source. But you've got to make sure that they follow the rules. If they're not real food, they need to be grass-fed. They need to be organic. They need to be chemical-free, heavy metal-free. Because in the supplement industry, there's a lot of crookedness that goes on, and there's a lot of junk and garbage. Probably one of the least safe to take, in my opinion, is if you're going for whey protein. Now whey protein is very healthy if you're eating it fresh from your own cow, your A2 cow. But whey protein on the market, for the most part, it's rancid. It's heated. It's high heat production, and so the protein is denatured, and what you're really left with is rotten protein. I mean, that's the whole thing. And so, yeah, there will be some protein value to it versus having no protein at all, but it's not good for you. This is why so many people on those whey supplements have a lot of acne and other health issues. Plus, we also know that the whey increases blood sugar issues. It's actually been linked in a number of research studies to increase the risk for metabolic syndrome and diabetes. So I don't care for using or recommending whey as a primary source of protein unless you've got your own cows and you're making your own curds and whey and you're eating the whey in that regard. But this is where I would recommend that you stay if you're wanting to do supplementation. Now, also some people want to supplement with collagen, because if you don't eat for example, if you don't cook down your bones, if you don't cook down the cartilage on the bones itself, which is where a lot of that collagen is. If you don't eat the skin, like the chicken skin or whatever other type of animal that you're consuming, then you're not getting great levels of collagen. And collagen is, again, it's a very critical component to the protein family. There are different kinds of proteins, and so collagen's being one of those that might be very helpful. Now, some of you may not be able to fathom either of these things, right? And so if you're, just depending on who you are, and you're just looking for a way to get it in you, but without having to eat those types of things, one of the things I would recommend that you take is amino acids, what are known as free-form amino acids. And free-form amino acids contain the essential amino acids that your body needs to make all of the other amino acids. In essence, they're the building blocks to that protein. And so taking these free-form amino acids can be very, very helpful. An example of a free-form amino acid that many of you are familiar with is glutamine. Many of you probably take a glutamine or have taken a glutamine because it's notorious for helping with things like leaky gut. And so this is an example of a free form. I like blending all of the essential amino acids into a powder to have a complete free form. That way, if you're trying to get less calories but have something that can help you recover from exercise, but you're concerned about the excessive quantity of meat, because in your diet or the way you're living your diet, it's a health concern that you have, this is one of the best ways to get your protein requirement, is just in the free form amino acids. We have a blend called ultra aminos that helps to accomplish that. Now, there's a component that I also want to get into before we start taking any kind of questions, and that's protein absorption. So I think it's important to have a short conversation about how protein is absorbed so that we can understand better how to meet our body's needs. This is the stomach. And so your esophagus and the food is coming down, right? So the food that contains the protein, right? And so a lot of your protein digestion occurs in the stomach. We have specialized enzymes that are made by the cells in the stomach. Not digestives, but digestion, sorry. So we have pepsin, and pepsin is one of the major ingredients that helps us break down acid or a protein, but we have pepsin and we have acid, and this begins the process of protein breakdown. Okay, so we're starting to break down that protein. It doesn't matter whether it's plant-based protein or whether it's a meat-based protein. A big part of protein digestion occurs within the stomach itself. That acid is highly helpful in that process, and this is part of the issue for many of you. Is you've had either gluten or inflammatory foods. So if we look at, let's just make a little bit of room here. Gluten and inflammatory foods. So the cells that line the stomach, okay, the gluten can damage those cells. And if it damages those cells that produce acid, then what you're left with is reduction of stomach acid production, or hypochlorhydria, which is far more common than acid reflux. Now, if you have the symptoms of acid reflux, know that a lot of people with the symptoms of acid reflux don't have too much acid. They don't have enough acid. And this is one of the reasons why. And not having enough acid leads to that food rotting in your gut and irritating the gut lining. That's why it regurgitates. That's why it feels like heartburn. But these inflammatory foods will block your ability to produce acid, which is going to reduce your protein breakdown. So it's going to be harder for your body to access the protein that you're eating. And when that occurs, you become, over time, slowly more and more protein malnourished. Now, I said earlier, it's not just your stomach. It's also in your small intestine down here. A lot of those, your small intestinal cells also produce protein-degrading enzymes. So if you are eating gluten, and the classic case would be like celiac disease, where you're damaging your body's ability to produce these enzymes, then now you've got blocked your protein breakdown in another way. And some of you have to also remember that some of these enzymes aren't made in your gut, they're made in your pancreas. And so your pancreas secretes digestive enzymes that basically meet up here. Okay, and these enzymes dump into your small intestine and help you degrade protein. These enzymes called proteases. And so gluten can also damage the pancreas. So we got gluten can damage the acid-producing cells in the stomach and the digestive enzyme pepsin production cells in the stomach. It can destroy cells that help make enzymes in your small intestine, and it can, again, damage the pancreas. So there's multiple ways that gluten can damage your body's ability to digest. And that's why people with gluten sensitivity have such problems with malnutrition. And protein malnutrition is a big part of this as well. Now, I said earlier that the symptoms of reflux are the same as the symptoms of not producing enough stomach acid. And this is important because many people will have their doctors prescribe antacids or antacids. And so whether those are H2 blockers, or whether those are PPIs, there's just different kinds of medicines. Antacids like your Tums, your Rolaids, that kind of thing, and then H2 and PPIs. These medicines, they block acid, right? They stop it from being produced, or they neutralize it. And so what happens if you have low acid and your doctor says you have high acid, and then they put you on antacids and they suppress your acid even further, is you get worse, not better. And that is oftentimes a major hurdle for people's recovery, is that they're being put on medicines under the assumption. And the only real way to measure stomach acid accurately, just so you're aware, is a capsule endoscopy. So if your doctor's not done that, then they're guessing. They haven't given you a capsule endoscopy. Basically it's a pill you swallow, and it sends a radio signal to a computer to measure the pH of your. Actually, I did that wrong. It's a lowercase p, power of hydrogen. The pH in your GI tract. It's a capsule endoscopy study, And so you definitely, if you're curious about that, that's a fancy way of going about doing it. Now, a non-fancy way of testing this hypothesis is to take acid. And there's a supplemental form, betaine hydrochloride is acid. And if you take that before you eat, if you digest your food better and you feel better and you're less bloated and you have better bowel movements, because people with low stomach acid are chronically constipated. That's one of the major issues with not having adequate stomach acid. And so this type of supplement, we have a formula, gluten-free formula called Ultra Acid. And if you feel better and digest better, then you might have your answer. Like, that's the simple test to do this at home. This is kind of what you would ask your gastroenterologist to run on you. But we don't want stomach acid suppression, because stomach acid suppression has now been being linked to bone loss. It's been being linked to protein malnourishment. It's been being linked to mineral deficiencies and B12 deficiency and any nutrient that requires acid. You're going to cause deficiency of that nutrient potentially by blocking your body's ability to produce that acid, and that over time again can cause major malnutrition. So that's your crash course on protein. Let's open up the floor for any questions that you guys have. See, Jonah, I'm strict plant-based. Would love to know in which foods is the most protein for vegans. I think I answered that one. Thanks for tuning in, Jonah. I hope that was a helpful answer for you. Let's see. So, hi Doc, recently I heard you talk about not bathing every day. This is actually, this plays into protein, because when you bathe, when you overbathe, you're washing off your microbes. You're destroying part of your immune system, and so you're going to sequester and require more protein when you're doing that. So if you're bathing every day, now it depends. If you're a farmer and you've got your hands up in the hog pen and you got hog slop and poop all over you, go take a shower. But if you're an average guy in a sanitary environment day in, day out, you don't need to shower every day. Let your microbiome survive and thrive a little bit, 2 to 3 times a week, depending on how aggressive you sweat or how, if you deal with body odor issues or other things like that. But 2 to 3 times a week should be sufficient. We finally, let's see. Let's see, advice on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility syndromes. Many of you may have been told that you have or do have Ehlers-Danlos, and that the best thing that you can do for hypermobility is the problem with Ehlers-Danlos is it's a hypermobility, and the tendons and the ligaments that are supposed to stabilize your joints are hypermobile. So the best way is to train your muscles to be stronger. And so initially you got to start out with what you can tolerate. You have to make sure you're getting adequate protein so that you can repair from that training. But you really have to, you've got to train with exercise, with weight-bearing type of exercise. But you've got to start at a level that you don't dislocate yourself, because that's another thing that can happen in Ehlers-Danlos is dislocations. But you've got to train to build strength, because the training of the muscles itself will help stabilize the joints in the absence of stability from tendons and ligaments. The other thing you can do is hyperbalancing. Hyperbalancing will train the proprioceptors within your tendons and ligaments to do better work, so to become more stable. And so balancing exercises are very important and critical for Ehlers-Danlos. Let's see. I think I answered that one. So calculation for how much protein, I'd say if you're training, you need 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. If you're over the age of 50, you need the same amount. If you're younger and you're just trying to maintain what you have, I wouldn't go any less than 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. And on days where you train, if you don't train every day, on the days you train, make sure you're getting adequate protein. Now, in the level of 1.2 to 1.4. And also, after your workout on a fasted state. A lot of people want to eat and then work out. Don't do that. That's actually contradictory to your gut function and your gut health. It causes leaky gut. But within 60 minutes after the workout, it's not a bad idea to get that protein, because that's when your body is trying to ramp up healing and repair. Yeah, so Laura's got a question on orthostatic hypotension, so positionally related low blood pressure, and aside from salt and electrolytes, protein regulates blood pressure. It's actually called osmotic blood pressure regulation is part of what protein does, and so not having adequate protein can also lead to low blood pressure. So make sure, I would say, Laura, you got to make sure that you're counting and getting that protein level up. Let's see. Can I speak on the carnivore diet as a temporary healing or elimination diet? Yeah, Rachel, that's a great question. A lot of people go carnivore and feel remarkably better, and there's some really good science coming out in that carnivore realm of research. I would say this, I think many people who are hyper carbohydrate have done a lot of damage, and they're gluten sensitive, and they've done a lot of damage to their body's ability to break down carbohydrates. So when they go carnivore, they feel really well because they're no longer taking in foods that their body can't break down or process, and they're starting to become nourished again. So I think, in my opinion, more shorter term carnivore. I don't know that it's a great idea. I think time will really give us a better answer. It hasn't been around long enough to ascertain it, but I would say there may be some unique people that might thrive on it, but the vast majority of people are probably going to do better around that rule of thirds, a third carb, a third fat, a third protein. But if you're on that type of diet initially for several months to try to recover your GI tract function, and then you want to try to wean back in some other foods, it's not a bad idea. Can mold hidden in food be killed when you cook it? Yes, mold can be killed, but the toxins that it produces cannot. Those are called mycotoxins. And that's one of the big problems in our food supply, in our food chain, is the hidden mycotoxins. Again, it's a problem because when the farmers feed all that excessive grain, a lot of those grains are contaminated with mycotoxins. Those end up in the meat. Is it a good idea to take collagen as you age? Can be. I mean, it can be very, very helpful. Again, I would say it depends on whether or not you're eating collagen in your diet. Most of you don't get adequate collagen as a protein from the basic meats that you're eating because most of you eat purely and restrict yourself to just the muscle meats only. So in that regard, I would say yes, collagen is a very good idea. Let's see here. Is it okay to eat? So the question is loaded. Mary's asking, is it okay to eat excess meat to get enough protein and to feel full? Define excess meat. I mean, one person's opinion of excess meat is different than another person's. I mean, I'll eat an 8 or a 10 ounce steak, a ribeye, and many people would call that excess. I don't call it excess. I call it my Sunday meal because that's where I like to get that big bulk of protein to make sure I have plenty in me. So define excess meat. I think we can do anything in excess, but I think different definitions of excess exist, and we have to be clear about what you mean by that. I got to answer this just because he had the courage to ask it. Timster says, after a night of cocaine and alcohol, what should I do to detox? I'd say start with not having the night of cocaine and alcohol, but vitamin C and niacin, high doses of niacin, high doses of vitamin C, high doses of vitamin B6. If you're not sure what that means, Timster, go back and watch my crash courses on those 3 nutrients. I get several cold sores when I take collagen. Is there a way to prevent that? If you're taking collagen and getting cold sores, that's your body's way of saying don't eat it. So don't try to force it, Beatrice. Would you recommend to take ultra acid to help with meat protein digestion? Yes. So that's what I was talking about earlier, Brigida, is ultra acid. It's a formula that I have that has acid, but a number of other things that help to break protein down within the GI tract. Is it possible to be still low in protein if you only have hair loss, or is thyroid more likely the culprit? So both, and let me explain why. That's a great question. So we look at thyroid hormone. It's a common cause of hair loss. Thyroid hormone, also sometimes referred to as T4. This T is tyrosine. Now, tyrosine is an amino acid derived from Well, you should know if you watch me tonight from protein, right? So you could not be getting adequate protein in your diet, causing tyrosine deficit, which is going to impact and affect the way that you can produce T4. So that's one way that low protein can affect your thyroid. So the two are intrinsically connected. Low protein can affect your thyroid and cause low thyroid. It can cause nutritional hypothyroidism. But let's say it's not low protein. Can a low thyroid for another reason, and I'll give you another reason. That 4 represents iodine. It's how many molecules of iodine are attached to that tyrosine structure. And so you could be iodine deficient, right, and have low thyroid function, and you could still lose hair. And it's not related at all to the protein. So hair loss could be either or. It could be lack of protein leading to inability to produce adequate T4, which can cause hair loss, or lack of protein that can cause hair loss because hair is protein, right? But it could also be nothing to do with protein on this side, but a lack of iodine, which is necessary to make T4, which can indicate or create or contribute to hair loss. We're going to do a super deep dive on the thyroid a couple weeks from now, so you guys stay patient and we'll talk more in depth about that. But that hopefully that answers your question, Tiffany. Yeah, so dealing with iron deficiency, can lack of sufficient protein inhibit getting back to normal ferritin? Yes, because remember, iron is just part of it. Iron deficiency is part of it, but hemoglobin is a protein, and not getting adequate protein to form hemoglobin plus being iron deficient is like a double hit for recovery. How do you get that much protein in a meal? Somebody's asking. Well, you know, if you're depending on your body weight, Len, you know, I generally shoot for 30-40 grams of protein in a meal with my personal body weight and the level of protein that my body needs. So you know, a 6-ounce chicken breast, as an example, is about 27 grams of protein. When you mix that with a big plate of broccoli or cauliflower, or you mix that with some Brussels sprouts or cabbage, you're getting protein in that way. And any other vegetables that you eat are also going to be a source of protein. So again, you know, you mix and match, and if you can't stomach it all, if you feel like you can't eat that much, but you need that protein and you feel like it's a missing piece, that's where you might consider supplementation. And to go back up just a little bit, because that's Linda's question. I struggle to get that much protein in the foods I eat. How do I supplement? Healthy meats every day is not within my budget. I'm 71 with Hashimoto's. Yeah, that's where you would, Linda. That's where you would supplement with protein, with a high biological value protein, like the ones I was mentioning earlier, the ultra pure or the pure protein as a supplemental to get adequate levels up there. What if someone has cancer? No, you shouldn't. So there's kind of two sides to that, and I would say this. Look, there's a lot of experts who have great experience with vegetarian and cancer. And I'm not going to say that they don't, because their stories are real. And I've seen that be the case. I think to make the claim, though, that all people with cancer need to be on a vegetarian diet, this is misleading. One size fits all. Where has that ever worked? Show me a situation where one size fits all, and I might change my mind on this, but I know people that were vegetarian for 10, 12, 15 years and developed cancer because they were malnourished with protein. I also know people who overindulged on protein and ended up developing cancer. My point is, one size doesn't fit all. Maybe you're watching a cancer program, or you're trying a cancer program, or you're doing a cancer diet, and a lot of what you're reading about is vegetarian is the best diet to go. I would say that is inaccurate. You know, there's a term in cancer. As the cancer advances, there's a medical term referred to as cachexia. Cachexia is wasting. Your body starts to waste, and for many people, cachexia occurs as a result of protein malnourishment. And the reason why is part of it. The body's, remember, cancer is an immune disease, so your immune system will steal protein from your muscle. Okay, it'll steal protein from your muscle And that leads to wasting, cachexia. The more it steals, the weaker you get. And the weaker you get, the more the cancer takes over and dominates. So you've got to be super careful here. And this is where, again, if you've got cancer, I'm not your cancer doctor, so this is not advice for everyone, but I would just say this. One size does not, one size does not fit all. And you need to do a deeper dive into whether or not a higher protein or a lower protein or a vegetarian diet is the right move for you. That means getting with a doctor, getting with somebody who does functional work, who can help you get to the bottom and understand what your needs are as a unique individual, and not one size fitting all. Look, if you've got cancer, the one size fits all approach, in my opinion, is just bad advice. Anybody who's going to tell you this is the way all cancers are cured is wrong. I don't care who they are. I'll argue that to their face. Because there's never been a case nutritionally with any disease I've ever seen in over 20 years of practice that where one size fit everybody. That's why I test. Tests don't guess. We test for gluten sensitivity. We test for whether a person should be vegetarian or whether they shouldn't be vegetarian. We test for food sensitivities. We test for chemicals. We test for nutritional deficits. We test so that we don't have to guess. And many of you are out there doing your best, but your guesswork, if you're sick and you're still struggling and you've been at guessing for a really long time, quit it. Go find an expert. It's very important that you find somebody you can work with. Pea protein, I think I mentioned that earlier. Kristen's asking about pea protein and some powders for people with peanut allergy. Pea protein is a good source of vegetarian-based protein. So Matthew's asking if we can look at making our beef protein with monk fruit and not stevia. Actually, Matthew, the version you should check out is that we have one that doesn't have stevia. It's flavor-free. Whatever you add to it, if you add blueberries to it, if you add a banana to it, it takes on that taste. So you don't really even need the stevia in it. And so that's what I would encourage you to check out if you haven't already. Nope, back it up just a... Okay, now keep going. Best test to know if you have H. pylori, because H. pylori, if you have it, can affect your protein digestion. So it actually will make it apply to tonight's show. One of the best tests is a breath test, and your GI doctor can run that. They can also do a biopsy, do an endoscopy and do a biopsy to look for H. pylori type damage, and then you can also have mass spec done through stool sampling that might detect H. pylori that's present. Any of those would be acceptable ways to identify it. Let's see here. Betty says, I had steroids and biologics in part of a study, drug study, never got results. It has been more than 5 years. Is that long enough for good diet to overcome? I'm not quite sure I understand your question. If you're on the right diet, Betty, then you shouldn't need steroids and biologics if you're taking care of your diet and your lifestyle. So maybe rephrase that question. Not quite sure I understand what you mean. What do I recommend for pain? If you're dealing with pain, I recommend finding the origin of it. A lot of people, if you're in pain, I get that it's compassionate to help treat somebody's pain and help them function. But ultimately, is it more compassionate to continue to treat that pain, or is it more compassionate to find out the origin or the root cause of why they're having the pain? Depends on the style of pain. But generally speaking, if we're going to use something more natural to modulate inflammation, there's several things that can be used. High doses of omega-3 fatty acids is, in my opinion, one of the most effective ways. High doses, meaning 3 to 4 grams of concentrated EPA and DHA. Vitamin C, upwards of 5 grams a day. Mix that with 4 to 5 grams of quercetin every day as well. And then there's other natural remedies that can help regulate inflammation beyond just those general suggestions. There's white willow is another one that can be very effective. without the damage to the stomach. THC can be effective with CBD, but I don't recommend the THC aspect. I think if you need THC to regulate your pain, then you're missing something. CBD can be helpful as well, but again, I think just like THC and CBD, I think you're missing something if you have to use those, indefinitely. So Joan is asking, what about hyperacidity by eating too much protein? So again, define too much protein. The research doesn't pan out hyperacidity as a viable theory. And you know, a lot of you that check your pH of your saliva, or check the pH of your urine, or check the pH of your body fluids, right? You're missing the point. pH is different in different compartments of the body, and simply changing your diet one way or the other is not going to magically make you heal. And eating meat is not necessarily going to create such an acidity in the body that it destroys your capacity at health. That's actually not true. Now, you can overconsume meat too, just like you can overconsume vegetables. I can show, for every person that says I can't eat meat and I feel bad, I can show you a person as well that can't eat vegetables and fruits because they feel bad when they do. So again, it goes back to not one size fits all. Don't make that assumption. Let's see, let's see, keep going down. That's not a question. I like that. I stopped all grains and saw a huge improvement. I like hearing those testimonials. Let's see, back up just a little bit. Opinion on legumes for people with bowel disease. Yeah, they can be very inflammatory. So I would say you got to be very careful. That's why in No Grain, No Pain, my book No Grain, No Pain, again, it's why I take legumes out for the phase 2 aspect of the diet. I want to make sure that legumes aren't a problem. Again, that's if you're generalizing. It's if you're following that diet protocol. I like that. So Lily says, I hurt the tendons around my knees during high intensity exercise. It's been 4 months and my knees still hurt. Could I maybe not be eating enough protein? Absolutely. Absolutely, Lily. That brings me to a very important point that I want to talk about, and it just got away from me, and that's special conditions for protein. So know that when you're injured, when you're chronically inflamed, these are special conditions that are going to need you to increase your protein intake. Your body needs protein to heal and repair chronic inflammatory damage. And so a lot of times what we'll see is people be going along just fine and they'll have an injury and then they won't heal. And one of the reasons they won't heal is they're so used to a certain level and they're not increasing their level to respond to the increased levels of inflammation. So it's very important that you understand that your protein levels need to go up. If you're exercising aggressively or if you're exercising regularly, you should be getting more for that recovery. Or if you're chronically inflamed, if you're struggling with a chronic inflammatory disease, an autoimmune condition, your protein levels are going to be higher. Your needs are going to be higher than if you're not suffering with a chronic condition. And so you may have to initially take your level up to that 1.2, 1.4 range. And as you heal and as you repair, you might be able to back it down to a maintenance level, but you've got to get to that point where you're healing first. Let's see, go down on the left. Can you have ulcers without bleeding or pain? Is endoscopy the best way to detect that? Yes, you can. You can have ulcers without bleeding or pain. And yes, endoscopy is the best way to detect it and to be certain about it. Oh, how do you get someone to do those tests? I'm gluten-free and low B12 and inflammation in my small intestine, but got laughed at when I wanted to be tested for celiac. I'm now experiencing swollen ankles and other symptoms. Feel like I don't feel like I need to have all my vitamin levels tested, but doctors don't ever do that, at least not the ones I've seen. Wendy, I mean, that's the problem in traditional medicine. It's whack-a-mole. It's, you got a symptom, here's a drug. You're whacking the symptom, the mole of the symptom. You got to find somebody functional, in my opinion, if you want to get the right types of testing. And if your doctors laugh at you, then you should be walking out anyway. Now, if you want to just be tested for gluten sensitivity, you don't need to go see a doctor. Just go to glutenfreesociety.org. You can do genetic testing. You don't need a doctor's note for that genetic testing, and that'll help you identify whether or not you need to get gluten out of your diet. Let's see, go down on both sides for me. Keep going, keep going. Oh, went too far. Man, there's too many questions tonight. There's just no way I can get through them all. There we go. Somebody's asking about 23andMe testing. No, 23andMe data is not enough to detect gluten sensitivity. They're running only a couple of different kinds of SNP data for alpha-1 and beta-1. They're running the celiac panel, but they're not running the non-celiac gluten sensitivity panel. So you miss a lot. You get a lot of false negatives on a 23andMe. It's just not an accurate genetic test to look at gluten sensitivity in a non-celiac way. So, question about what test would you suggest to see if I have good protein digestion? There's several different types, Beverly. I'd say one of them is if we're looking at subjective testing at home, is the acid test. Take acid, as a supplemental, and if you digest better, if you feel less bloated, if you're one that when you eat protein, you get gassy, you get bloated, you get indigestion and constipation, adding acid, if you do that and you digest better, that's one kind of simple way to do it. I think I mentioned some other things where you can measure pH of the stomach, but beyond that, if your gut's inflamed, you're going to be malabsorbing and maldigesting protein to a certain extent. And so any type of test that helps you identify inflammatory bowel disease would also be helpful. You can also do amino acid testing where you can determine how well your body is getting or how many amino acids your body has. Amino acids, remember, the raw building blocks for protein. So if you're low in certain amino acids, it can give you some insight into whether or not you're protein malabsorbing as well. Yeah, so let's see. I was tested highly gluten intolerant. Does it mean my kids are also? There is depending on how you were tested, there's a very large chance that if you are, your kids are. Do you believe toenail fungus can be from wheat or other grains? It can be, and actually toenail fungus is immunosuppression. Often, your skin's immune system should be able to fight off a fungus underneath your toenail. And when your immune system is in a weakened state, that fungus is an opportunist. It will take over when there's nothing challenging it. So it can be from grains, but it can also be not enough protein. Remember, think of protein as one of the primary building blocks to the core fundamental elements that your immune system uses to fight and defend you from bad guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Dr. Osborne Zone. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe for more content like this, and make sure you come back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time and Thursday at noon 30 for more episodes.